Why does the story of the Knights of Ren feel incomplete even after the fall of the First Order and the death of Darth Sidious? Across films, comics, and reference books, they appear only in fragments. A handful of masked warriors stand behind Kylo Ren. Their weapons flash for a few moments. Their names are barely spoken, then they vanish into history. Yet the deeper you look into canon, the stranger they become. They were not Sith. They were not Jedi. They existed before Ben Solo ever called himself Kylo Ren. And tonight, as you settle into a quieter corner of the galaxy, you can follow the long shadow of these forgotten dark side wanderers and trace a path through one of the most mysterious groups in modern Star Wars lore. If you have traveled with these stories before, take a moment to note which night of the journey this is for you. If this is your first visit, simply call it Night 1. The tale ahead moves slowly through forgotten worlds, abandoned outposts, and the cold spaces beyond the borders of the New Republic. It is the story of the Knights of Ren, told through the facts canon gives us and the mysteries it leaves behind. The galaxy often remembers emperors, generals, and Jedi masters. The Knights of Ren were something different. They lived in the shadows between those larger legends. A fire burns beneath a dark sky. Wind moves through broken machinery left behind by some long-forgotten settlement. The stars overhead are sharp and distant. Around the flames stand figures hidden behind masks and helmets, their faces invisible. Metal catches the firelight. Strange weapons hang at their sides. No banners mark their allegiance. No military insignia identifies their rank. They belong neither to the Galactic Empire nor to the New Republic. In the darkness beyond the fire waits a name: Ren. What exactly were the Knights of Ren, and why does their existence seem to sit outside the familiar traditions of the Force? That question forms the foundation of everything that follows. For decades, Star Wars stories taught audiences to think in terms of Jedi and Sith. The Jedi Order served the Galactic Republic for thousands of years. The Sith, whether openly or in secret, opposed them through many different eras. Even after the destruction of both institutions, their influence shaped the galaxy. Yet when the Knights of Ren finally emerged in canon, they belonged to neither lineage. Their beliefs, their customs, and even their relationship with the Force operated according to different rules. The first glimpse many viewers received came during the events of 34 ABY in The Force Awakens. Rey's vision inside Maz Kanata's castle on Takodana showed a rain-soaked battlefield and a group of dark figures standing near Kylo Ren. The moment lasted only seconds. The setting was unclear. The identities of the figures were unknown. Yet their appearance immediately sparked questions throughout the fan community. Who were these warriors following the son of Han Solo and Leia Organa? Why did they resemble neither Imperial soldiers nor Sith acolytes? The films offered no immediate answers. For several years, the Knights remained almost entirely mysterious. The Last Jedi, set shortly after The Force Awakens in 34 ABY, focused on the conflict between Rey, Luke Skywalker, Kylo Ren, and Supreme Leader Snoke. The Knights were absent. Their disappearance only deepened the intrigue. Behind the scenes, reference books acknowledged their existence, but little information surfaced. They occupied a curious position within canon. They were clearly important to Kylo Ren's identity, yet the audience knew almost nothing about them. The silence surrounding them became part of their mystique. The most substantial answers arrived through the comic miniseries The Rise of Kylo Ren, published between 2019 and 2020. Set around 28 ABY, several years before the sequel trilogy, the story revealed something surprising. The Knights of Ren were already active before Ben Solo joined them. They were not created by Kylo Ren. They were not a special unit founded by the First Order. They existed as an independent group operating beyond the reach of established governments. Their leader already carried the title of Ren. Their philosophy already existed. Ben Solo entered their story as an outsider. That revelation changes the entire perspective. For many years, audiences assumed the Knights were simply Kylo Ren's personal followers. Canon tells a different story. The group possessed its own traditions, its own hierarchy, and its own understanding of power. Their leader was a man known only as Ren. The title and the individual became almost inseparable. In conversations with Ben Solo, Ren described the dark side through language, unlike that used by Sith Lords. Darth Sidious spoke of domination. Darth Vader spoke of power. Ren spoke of something he called the shadow. He treated darkness less as a tool and more as a natural state of existence. Why does that distinction matter? Because it places the Knights of Ren outside the familiar structure of Sith philosophy. The Sith pursued mastery. From Darth Bane's rule of two to Darth Sidious's final order on Exegol, Sith doctrine emphasized control, ambition, and hierarchy. Ren's teachings felt far more primitive. The shadow, as he described it, existed everywhere. It flowed through violence, fear, instinct, and desire. The Knights did not seek to rule the galaxy. They wandered through it. They took what they wanted. They followed strength when they found it. Their worldview resembled a predatory lifestyle more than an organized religion. The surviving canon sources paint an image of a group that lived on the edges of civilization. They moved through remote sectors where New Republic influence remained weak. After the Battle of Jakku in 5 ABY ended the Galactic Civil War and shattered the Empire's military power, the New Republic spent decades rebuilding galactic governance. Yet the galaxy remained enormous. Countless frontier systems lay far beyond the reach of centralized authority. Smugglers, pirates, mercenaries, and cults continued to thrive in those regions. The Knights of Ren belonged to that lawless environment. They were products of the frontier rather than products of government. Their ship reflected that existence. The Knights traveled aboard the Night Buzzard, a vessel later seen during the events of the Rise of Skywalker in 35 ABY. Unlike the sleek military craft of the First Order or the elegant cruisers of the New Republic, the Night Buzzard looked harsh and practical. It resembled the home of scavengers and raiders rather than officers and diplomats. That detail tells its own story. The Knights were never aristocrats. They were survivors. Their weapons reinforced the image. Most carried brutal melee weapons instead of lightsabers. Axes, blades, clubs, and modified firearms appeared alongside dark side abilities. They embraced direct violence without the ceremonial traditions associated with either Jedi or Sith. Yet perhaps the greatest mystery remains the simplest one. Where did they come from? Canon has never provided a definitive answer. No source identifies the group's founding date. No source names its creator. No source explains how Ren himself acquired leadership. Some fans have proposed connections to older dark side cults scattered throughout galactic history. Others point toward ancient traditions that survived outside both Jedi and Sith institutions. These remain theories rather than established facts. What canon confirms is more limited and, in many ways, more intriguing. By 28 ABY, the Knights already existed. Their leader already carried the red blade called the Ren. Their followers already believed in the shadow. And somewhere in the vast darkness beyond the known worlds, their story had begun long before Ben Solo ever crossed their path. As the fire crackles against the night wind, the masked figures remain motionless around its glow. Their leader stands among them, watching the flames reflect from a crimson blade, unlike any ordinary weapon. He is known simply as Ren. Before the son of Leia Organa arrives, before Luke Skywalker's Jedi temple falls, before the rise of the First Order and the return of Darth Sidious. The Knights already wait in the darkness, and the next step in their story begins with the man who gave them their name. Why did the leader of the Knights of Ren carry a red lightsaber if he was not a Sith? The question seems simple at first, but it opens one of the most unusual corners of modern Star Wars canon. Throughout the Skywalker saga, red blades are closely associated with the Sith and other dark side users. Darth Maul wielded one during the Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY. Count Dooku carried one throughout the Clone Wars. Darth Vader's crimson weapon became a symbol of Imperial terror after the fall of the Republic in 19 BBY. Yet Ren stood outside that lineage. He never claimed the title of Sith Lord. No canon source connects him to Darth Sidious, Darth Vader, or the ancient Sith Order. The weapon itself was called the Ren. That detail is important. In the rise of Kylo Ren, the name belonged both to the man and to the blade he carried. The distinction often seemed meaningless because the two had become intertwined over time. When Ren spoke about the weapon, he described it almost as a living expression of his philosophy. The blade was not a badge of office in the way a Jedi lightsaber symbolized knighthood. It represented freedom through power, violence through instinct, action without restraint. The weapon embodied everything the Knights believed the shadow demanded. Canon never explains where the blade originated. It already existed when Ben Solo encountered the group around 28 ABY. The lightsaber possessed an unstable appearance, with energy flickering unevenly through its crimson beam. Many fans immediately noticed similarities to Kylo Ren's own crossguard saber, seen years later in The Force Awakens. Whether this resemblance was intentional inspiration on Ben's part remains unstated. What can be said with confidence is that Ben spent significant time observing Ren and his weapon before adopting his own identity as Kylo Ren. The visual connection between the two blades is impossible to ignore. The man called Ren himself remains one of the least documented individuals in canon. No birth name has ever been revealed. No homeworld has been identified. No official source provides a detailed biography. By the time audiences meet him in the comics, he already occupies a position of authority among the Knights. His followers obey him without hesitation. His confidence suggests years of leadership. Like many frontier warlords throughout galactic history, he seems less interested in institutions than in personal strength. He rules because he is dangerous enough to rule. That attitude separated him sharply from the Sith. Consider Darth Sidious. during the final years of the Republic. His plans involved Senate manipulation, galactic conquest, clone armies, and centuries of Sith ambition. Ren showed little interest in such grand designs. He never speaks about ruling worlds. He never outlines a vision for galactic order. Instead, he describes existence in immediate terms. The shadow is present, the strong embrace it, the weak resist it. This worldview feels ancient and almost tribal compared to the elaborate political schemes of the Sith. The knights who followed him reflected that philosophy. Canon identifies several members active during this period, including Trudgen, Vikrul, Cardo, Kuruk, Ushar, and Aplek. Most of these names would only become widely known later through reference books and visual dictionaries connected to the rise of Skywalker. Their appearances varied dramatically. Some wore scavenged armor, others carried weapons built from salvaged technology. None looked like disciplined soldiers. They resembled raiders drawn from the forgotten corners of the galaxy. Yet beneath the rough exterior existed a surprisingly unified culture. What held them together was not military structure, but belief. Ren taught that all living beings contained darkness. The Jedi sought balance and discipline. The Sith sought domination and mastery. The Knights sought release. They followed impulses rather than suppressing them. Anger was not a weakness to overcome. Fear was not something to conquer. Violence was not a last resort. These ideas created a framework that attracted individuals already living beyond the boundaries of conventional society. To the Knights, civilization itself often appeared as a cage. Their preferred territory reflected this mindset. During the decades after the Galactic Civil War ended in 5 ABY, large portions of the galaxy remained sparsely governed. The New Republic restored democratic institutions and reduced military expansion, believing the mistakes of the Empire should never be repeated. While that approach brought peace to many core systems, frontier regions frequently operated according to their own rules. Smuggling syndicates expanded. Pirate fleets survived. Independent enclaves flourished. The Knights of Ren moved through this environment like predators crossing open wilderness. The comic presents one particularly revealing moment when Ren explains the nature of the shadow to Ben Solo. He does not deliver a formal lesson. He does not lecture like a Jedi master. Instead, he speaks as though describing a force of nature. Fire burns, storms arrive. The shadow exists. His language strips away morality and replaces it with inevitability. That perspective helps explain why the Knights never developed into a conventional religious order. They saw themselves less as servants of darkness and more as people willing to acknowledge truths others refuse to face. Yet there is a contradiction at the center of Ren's philosophy. If the Knights valued freedom above all else, why follow a leader at all? Why submit to hierarchy? Why gather around one man carrying one blade? The comics never answer directly, but the behavior of the group offers clues. Strength commanded respect. Leadership belonged to whoever could claim and defend it. The title Ren was not protected by lineage or ceremony. It was protected by power. Beneath the language of freedom lurked a brutal reality. The Knights followed because they believed their leader deserved to be followed. As the years passed, Ren's influence spread quietly through the lives of his followers. The night buzzard carried them between worlds. Their weapons grew worn from countless confrontations. Their reputation traveled farther than their numbers. Somewhere beyond the attention of senators and admirals, the knights built a legend around themselves. They were not large enough to threaten governments. They were not organized enough to establish empires. But they endured. And in 28 ABY, on the eve of a disaster that would shake Luke Skywalker's rebuilt Jedi Order, a young man named Ben Solo was moving steadily toward the moment when his path would cross theirs. Far away from the wandering knights, Luke Skywalker continued the difficult work of rebuilding the Jedi. Decades had passed since the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY and the death of Darth Vader aboard the second Death Star. The Empire had fallen, the Republic had returned, yet the future remained uncertain. Among Luke's students was his most gifted apprentice, the grandson of Anakin Skywalker. Ben Solo carried extraordinary potential. He also carried fears, doubts, and hidden wounds that few around him fully understood. And before long, those fears would bring him face to face with the man called Ren. Why did Ben Solo seek out the Knights of Ren after the destruction of Luke Skywalker's temple? At first glance, the answer appears obvious. He had nowhere else to go. Yet the deeper you examine the events of 28 ABY, the more complicated the question becomes. Ben was not an ordinary fugitive searching for protection. He was the son of Leia Organa, the former princess of Alderaan and future leader of the Resistance. He was the son of Han Solo, one of the most famous heroes of the Galactic Civil War. Most importantly, he was Luke Skywalker's apprentice and the grandson of Anakin Skywalker. The choices available to him were far greater than those available to most people in the galaxy. To understand why Ben's path crossed the Knights of Ren, it is necessary to return to the final days of Luke's Jedi Academy. By 28 ABY, Luke had spent years rebuilding the Jedi Order after its destruction during the reign of the Empire. His temple housed a small but growing group of students. Among them were Vo, Hennix, and Tai, young Jedi trainees who would later become central figures in the events surrounding Ben's fall. Luke believed he was creating the foundation for a new generation of Jedi. Unknown to him, another influence had already taken root within his most powerful student. That influence was Supreme Leader Snoke. Canon confirms that Snoke had been communicating with Ben for years before the destruction of the temple. By the time of The Last Jedi, Luke openly acknowledges this. Snoke had been reaching into Ben's mind from afar, nurturing fears and insecurities while presenting himself as a source of understanding. Later revelations in the rise of Skywalker would expose an even darker truth. Snoke himself was ultimately a creation of Darth Sidious, operating from the hidden Sith world of Exegol. The manipulation of Ben Solo had therefore begun long before the galaxy knew either Snoke or the Final Order existed. The pivotal moment arrived during a storm-filled night at Luke's temple. The scene is recounted from multiple perspectives in The Last Jedi, each revealing different layers of truth. Luke entered Ben's hut and briefly considered killing him after sensing the darkness growing within him. For an instant, Luke ignited his lightsaber. Almost immediately, he regretted the thought, but Ben awoke and saw his master standing over him with a drawn weapon. In that single terrible moment, trust shattered. The destruction that followed changed the course of galactic history. The temple was consumed by fire and devastation. Luke's Jedi Order collapsed before it had truly begun. Several students died, others survived. Canon carefully distinguishes between what happened next and the assumptions many characters initially made. Contrary to rumors within the galaxy, Ben did not personally slaughter every student at the Academy. The rise of Kylo Ren shows a more complicated sequence of events. The destruction itself resulted from a catastrophic surge of power, and the surviving students pursued Ben afterward, believing him responsible. Among those survivors, Vo became particularly determined. Alongside Hennix and Tai, she followed Ben across multiple worlds. Their pursuit adds an important dimension to this period of his life. Ben was not simply fleeing toward darkness. He was being hunted by people who had once trained beside him. The galaxy around him was rapidly redefining him as a villain. Every encounter pushed him further away from the identity he had known. Every confrontation reinforced the growing sense that there could be no return to the life he had lived before. What is striking about Ben during these events is how uncertain he remains. Later audiences often imagine Kylo Ren as fully formed from the moment the temple fell. The comics tell a different story. Ben does not immediately embrace a new name. He does not instantly become the confident enforcer seen in The Force Awakens 6 years later. Instead, he spends much of this period confused, angry, and isolated. He knows his relationship with Luke has been destroyed. He knows he cannot simply return to Leia and Han, yet he has not fully committed himself to any new path. That uncertainty becomes especially clear when he encounters Ren again. The meeting does not resemble a ceremonial initiation into a dark order. Ren observes Ben with curiosity rather than devotion. The leader of the Knights recognizes immense power but does not treat Ben as a chosen savior. In many ways, Ren sees him as prey, a gifted Force user, a potential ally, a possible rival. The conversations between them feel less like recruitment and more like an evaluation conducted by two dangerous individuals trying to understand each other. Meanwhile, the pursuit by Vo, Hennix, and Tai grows increasingly desperate. Their journey takes them across remote regions of the galaxy, far from the political centers of the New Republic. These encounters reveal another important truth about Ben's character. Despite his growing anger, he repeatedly hesitates to kill his former friends. Time after time, opportunities arise. Time after time, he stops short of complete commitment to the darkness. The conflict that defines Kylo Ren throughout the sequel trilogy is already visible here. The struggle between Ben Solo and the identity he is becoming has not yet been resolved. One of the most revealing moments occurs when Ben begins to realize that neither the Jedi nor the Knights of Ren offer the certainty he seeks. Luke's teachings feel distant, Ren's philosophy feels incomplete. The shadow that Ren describes provides freedom but not purpose. This is where the influence of Snoke becomes increasingly important. Unlike Ren, Snoke offers direction. Unlike Luke, he offers acceptance without judgment. The promise is seductive. A young man who feels abandoned by his master and pursued by his friends becomes vulnerable to anyone claiming to understand his pain. Yet another mystery emerges here. If Snoke wanted Ben as an apprentice, why allow him to spend time with the Knights of Ren at all? Why not bring him directly into the service of the future First Order? Canon never gives a definitive answer. One possibility is that Snoke saw value in the experience. The Knights could harden Ben. They could sever his remaining attachments. They could expose him to violence beyond the structured world of the Jedi. By the time Snoke fully claimed him, much of the transformation would already be underway. As Ben travels with Ren and his followers, the distance between his old life and his new one continues to grow. The stars outside the viewport of the night buzzard no longer resemble the stars he once watched from Luke's temple. The names that shaped his childhood, Skywalker, Solo, Organa, feel increasingly heavy. Around him stand warriors who care little for legacy or bloodlines. They judge only strength. For the first time, Ben finds himself among people who neither fear his famous family nor revere it. And before long, the uneasy balance between Ben Solo and the man called Ren will reach a breaking point, from which only one of them can emerge as leader. Why did the Knights of Ren accept Ben Solo as their leader after he killed the man they had followed for years? In most organizations, such an act would trigger revenge, civil war, or collapse. Loyalty usually survives longer than fear. Yet the Knights reacted differently. When the confrontation ended, they did not attack Ben. They did not attempt to preserve Ren's legacy against an outsider. Instead, they recognized something in the young former Jedi and chose to follow him. To understand why, you have to understand what leadership meant among the Knights of Ren. The final confrontation unfolded during the events depicted in The Rise of Kylo Ren. By this point, Ben had spent time among the Knights while continuing to evade Vo, Hennix, and Ty. His connection to Snoke was growing stronger. His old identity was beginning to fracture. Yet Ren remained the dominant figure within the group. He carried the blade called the Ren. He defined the philosophy of the shadow. He stood at the center of their small but dangerous community. If Ben wanted to move beyond merely traveling beside the Knights, he would eventually have to confront the man who led them. The confrontation was not driven by personal hatred alone. Ren had begun to recognize something troubling. Ben Solo was no ordinary Force user. His raw connection to the Force exceeded that of anyone among the Knights. Even before completing his transformation into Kylo Ren, Ben possessed abilities that dwarfed those of Ren's followers. Ren sensed both opportunity and danger. He could potentially shape this young man into an ally. But if that effort failed, Ben might become a threat to everything Ren controlled. The tension between them became unavoidable. Meanwhile, the surviving Jedi students continued their pursuit. Vo remained convinced that Ben had become a monster. Hennix struggled to reconcile loyalty with doubt. Ty increasingly questioned whether events were as simple as they appeared. Their hunt eventually converged with the Knights. The resulting conflict became one of the final links connecting Ben to his former life. Lightsabers ignited. Blaster fire flashed through the darkness. Old friendships collapsed beneath fear and misunderstanding. The era of Ben Solo was reaching its final moments. Among the most tragic aspects of this period is the fate of Ty. Throughout the pursuit, Ty repeatedly attempted to reach the friend he once knew. Unlike Vo, he never fully surrendered hope. He believed Ben could still return. In another story, perhaps that belief might have mattered, but the forces surrounding Ben had become too powerful. The influence of Snoke, the destruction of the temple, and the growing expectations of the Knights all pushed events toward a darker conclusion. The possibility of reconciliation grew smaller with every passing encounter. The decisive moment came when Ben and Ren finally turned against one another. Their conflict represented more than a duel between two individuals. It was a clash between competing visions of power. Ren believed in instinct, freedom, and the shadow. Ben was already moving towards something more ambitious. Under Snoke's guidance, he was beginning to imagine a larger destiny. The fight itself was brutal and direct, fitting the culture of the Knights. There was little ceremony, no ancient council watched, no audience gathered, only strength mattered. When the confrontation ended, Ren was dead. Ben used the Force against him and ultimately claimed victory. More importantly, he claimed the blade itself. The weapon called the Ren passed into his possession. In that moment, leadership transferred not through inheritance or election, but through conquest. The logic would have been instantly recognizable to the Knights. Their entire worldview rested upon strength. Ren had often implied that power determined legitimacy. When Ben defeated him, the philosophy consumed its own creator. The shadow had chosen a new master. This helps explain the reaction of the remaining Knights. To outsiders, their acceptance of Ben appears sudden. From their perspective, it was entirely consistent. Ren had never taught loyalty to a person. He taught loyalty to strength. If another individual proved stronger, leadership naturally shifted. The same principle governed countless warrior cultures throughout both real and fictional history. The Knights were not betraying Ren. They were obeying the very rules Ren had established. His death validated his teachings rather than contradicting them. Yet Ben did not simply become another Ren, he adopted a new identity altogether. The name Kylo Ren emerged during this transformative period. Canon does not provide a detailed explanation of the name's linguistic origin, but its significance is clear. Ben was abandoning the identity tied to his family. Solo connected him to Han. Organa connected him to Leia. Skywalker connected him to Luke and Anakin. Kylo Ren represented something new, a deliberate separation from the life he believed had failed him. The symbolism runs deeper than a simple change of name. By taking the title Ren into his own identity, Ben effectively absorbed the Order's legacy into himself. The Knights no longer followed a leader called Ren. They followed Kylo Ren. The distinction may seem small, but it altered the group's structure. Under the original Ren, the Knights had functioned as a wandering dark side cult. Under Kylo Ren, they would gradually become connected to far larger forces. The influence of Snoke and the rise of the First Order would draw them into galactic events on a scale they had never previously experienced. Around this time, the political landscape of the galaxy was also changing. While the New Republic governed from rotating capitals and celebrated decades of relative peace, imperial remnants hidden in the unknown regions were consolidating power. Guided by figures such as Brendol Hux and eventually Supreme Leader Snoke, those remnants evolved into the First Order. Vast shipyards expanded beyond the frontier. Military academies trained future officers. New Star Destroyers entered service. Most citizens of the Republic remained unaware of the threat growing in the darkness. Kylo Ren's transformation occurred alongside the birth of that future conflict. Another subtle change appeared within the Knights themselves. Under the original Ren, their activities felt aimless, driven by appetite and opportunity. Under Kylo, purpose began replacing instinct. He still embraced violence. He still carried the darkness within him. But his ambitions extended farther than survival or personal freedom. Snoke encouraged grander visions: the destruction of the Jedi, the rise of a new order, the pursuit of power capable of reshaping the galaxy. The Knights remained the same warriors, but the horizon ahead of them had become much larger. As the engines of the Night Buzzard hummed through hyperspace, the old era quietly faded away. Ren was gone. The blade that carried his name belonged to another. The surviving knights sat in the dim glow of their vessel's interior, watching a new leader emerge. Somewhere far beyond them, Luke Skywalker had withdrawn into grief and isolation. Leia Organa sensed her son slipping farther from reach. And in the hidden regions where Snoke prepared his plans, a young man who once answered to Ben Solo was becoming exactly what his master had hoped he would become: Kylo Ren. What did the Knights of Ren actually do during the years between Ben Solo's fall in 28 ABY and their appearance beside Kylo Ren in The Force Awakens in 34 ABY? This 6-year period remains one of the largest unexplored spaces in their history. By the time audiences first meet Kylo Ren aboard the First Order Star Destroyer Finalizer, he is no longer an uncertain young man searching for identity. He commands respect. He serves Supreme Leader Snoke directly. Captain Phasma and General Hux treat him as one of the most powerful figures within the First Order. Yet the path from newly crowned leader of a wandering cult to feared dark side enforcer remains only partially illuminated by canon. The visual clues are striking. Compare Ben Solo at the end of The Rise of Kylo Ren with the Kylo Ren who arrives on Jakku in 34 ABY. The transformation is profound. His armor is heavier. His voice carries authority. His distinctive crossguard lightsaber has been constructed. Reference materials explain that the weapon's unstable blade resulted from a cracked kyber crystal. Instead of replacing the damaged crystal, Kylo forced it into service. The result was volatile energy vents extending from either side of the hilt. The weapon looked dangerous because it truly was dangerous. That lightsaber tells its own story. Jedi lightsabers traditionally reflected balance and control. The elegant weapons carried by Obi-Wan Kenobi, Luke Skywalker, and Rey in later years displayed stable blades powered by harmonized crystals. Kylo's saber reflected internal conflict. The crackling energy seemed barely contained. Every ignition sounded less like the clean hum of a Jedi weapon and more like a furnace roaring to life. In many ways, it became a symbol of the man himself: powerful, intimidating, and fundamentally unstable. Meanwhile, the Knights of Ren remained close to him. By this stage, their identities had become more clearly defined. Canon sources connected to the rise of Skywalker provide names and equipment for the 6 surviving knights. Aplek wielded a massive axe-like weapon. Cardo carried heavy blaster equipment and explosive devices. Kuruk favored a rifle and blade combination. Truggen wielded a modified vibro cleaver. Ushar carried a war club. Vikrul fought with a long scythe-like weapon. Together they formed a uniquely intimidating group whose appearance blended scavenger culture, dark side symbolism, and battlefield practicality. One of the most interesting aspects of the Knights is what they did not become. They never transformed into Sith apprentices. None carried traditional Sith titles. None received extensive lightsaber training. None challenged Kylo Ren for dominance in the manner Sith history might suggest. During the era of Darth Bane's rule of two, an apprentice was expected to overthrow the master eventually. The knights operated differently. They served as companions, enforcers, and hunters rather than rivals. Their relationship with Kylo resembled a warband more than a Sith hierarchy. This distinction becomes important when examining the rise of the First Order. Following the Battle of Jakku in 5 ABY, surviving Imperial forces retreated into the unknown regions. Over decades, those remnants evolved into a powerful military state hidden beyond the awareness of most citizens. Massive shipyards produced resurgent-class star destroyers. Stormtrooper training programs expanded. Entire generations grew up inside First Order territory. Yet the Knights of Ren never appeared fully integrated into this military machine. They remained separate, almost untamed. Imagine the contrast aboard a First Order vessel. Officers followed regulations, stormtroopers obeyed commands, engineers maintained reactors and weapon systems according to strict procedures. Then there were the Knights. They carried crude melee weapons through polished corridors. They wore masks instead of uniforms. They answered to Kylo Ren rather than conventional chains of command. To ordinary personnel, they must have seemed less like soldiers and more like dark omens walking through the ship. Their presence represented a side of the First Order that even disciplined officers could not entirely control. Why would Snoke tolerate such unpredictability? The answer may lie in the specific role the Knights fulfilled. Conventional military forces excel at occupying worlds and winning battles. The Knights were suited to different tasks. Their talents lay in intimidation, pursuit, and violence. Reference books describe them as elite enforcers, operating in service to Kylo Ren. They existed outside the normal structures of military authority. When subtlety failed and fear became useful, the Knights could accomplish things armies could not. Their value came from being unusual. The brief vision seen by Rey on Takodana offers another intriguing glimpse into this period. During her Force vision in Maz Kanata's castle, she sees Kylo Ren standing among the Knights in heavy rain. Bodies lie scattered across the ground. The exact location remains unidentified in canon. The circumstances remain unexplained. Some fans have speculated that the scene depicts one of Kylo's early missions after joining Snoke. Others believe it may show an operation connected to the search for Force-sensitive relics. Lucasfilm has never provided a definitive answer. The mystery remains one of the most discussed visual fragments in sequel-era lore. The uncertainty surrounding that vision is significant because it reflects the broader nature of the Knights themselves. They move through the edges of the narrative. Major battles occur without them. Galactic politics unfold beyond their concern. Yet whenever they appear, they leave questions behind. What worlds did they visit? How many missions did they undertake for Snoke? How many ancient artifacts passed through their hands? Canon intentionally leaves much of this unexplored, creating an aura of mystery that few groups in modern Star Wars possess. At the same time, Kylo Ren's connection to Snoke deepened. Snoke offered what Ren never had, a grand purpose. Under Snoke's guidance, Kylo began pursuing not merely personal power, but galactic transformation. The destruction of Luke's Jedi legacy became a central objective. The eventual defeat of the New Republic became another. By the beginning of The Force Awakens, Kylo had become one of Snoke's most trusted servants. Yet traces of his earlier life remained. His obsession with Darth Vader, his lingering emotional conflict, his inability to fully extinguish Ben Solo. These weaknesses would shape everything that followed. The irony is difficult to miss. The original Ren taught freedom from restraint. Snoke taught obedience to a larger vision. Kylo stood between those philosophies. He retained the name Ren, but increasingly served another master. The Knights followed him faithfully through this transformation. Perhaps they saw strength and cared about little else. Perhaps they genuinely believed his destiny would elevate them all. Whatever their reasons, they remained at his side as the First Order prepared to emerge from the shadows. Across the galaxy, few people even knew the Knights existed. Senators debated policy within the New Republic. Leia Organa warned of growing danger and struggled to convince others that Imperial remnants remained a threat. Smugglers crossed hyperspace routes, much as they always had. Farmers watched twin suns rise over distant worlds. Ordinary life continued. Yet beyond public attention, Kylo Ren and his masked followers were moving steadily toward the events that would ignite a new galactic war, one that would begin with a scavenger from Jakku, a map to Luke Skywalker, and the awakening of powers that even the Knights of Ren could not fully understand. Did Supreme Leader Snoke truly control the Knights of Ren? Or did he merely exploit a group that already existed for his own purposes? The question sits at the heart of the Knights' role during the rise of the First Order. By the time of The Force Awakens, in 34 ABY, many viewers naturally assumed the Knights were simply another branch of Snoke's growing regime. Yet canon paints a more nuanced picture. The Knights predated both Kylo Ren's allegiance to Snoke and the public emergence of the First Order. They had their own culture, their own traditions, and their own leader before Snoke ever entered their story. What followed appears less like creation and more like appropriation. To understand this relationship, it helps to examine Snoke himself. When audiences first encountered him in The Force Awakens, he appeared as a towering holographic figure commanding immense authority. He directed fleets. He advised Kylo Ren. He ruled over the First Order from hidden locations beyond the New Republic's reach. At the time, his origins were entirely mysterious. Only later in the rise of Skywalker would the truth emerge. Snoke was an artificial being created through the experiments of Darth Sidious on Exegol. He possessed independent thoughts and personality, but his existence ultimately served Palpatine's larger design. That revelation changes the context of everything surrounding Kylo Ren. Palpatine's influence had never truly disappeared after the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY. Hidden on Exegol within the unknown regions, he continued shaping events through proxies, cultists, and secret projects. The Sith Eternal worked tirelessly to prepare for his eventual return. Massive shipyards constructed the Ziston-class star destroyers of the Final Order. Cloning experiments continued. Loyalists maintained ancient Sith traditions. Within this vast hidden strategy, Ben Solo became one of the most valuable targets. Through Snoke, Palpatine sought to corrupt the last major heir of the Skywalker bloodline. The Knights of Ren fit awkwardly into this plan because they were never designed by the Sith. They emerged from an entirely different tradition. Yet from Snoke's perspective, that difference may have made them useful. The Knights offered access to a group of hardened dark side adherents already loyal to Kylo Ren. Rather than replacing them, Snoke appears to have incorporated them into his broader network. This approach resembles strategies used by the Sith throughout history. Instead of destroying every independent power structure, they often absorbed those that could serve their goals. Evidence for this can be seen in how little direct interaction canon shows between Snoke and the Knights themselves. Snoke's primary relationship remained with Kylo Ren. He mentored him, manipulated him, tested him, encouraged his darkest impulses. The Knights largely operated in the background. They served Kylo first and foremost. Even during the years when Snoke held absolute authority within the First Order, the Knights remained connected to Kylo rather than integrated into the military hierarchy. Their loyalty flowed through him. This distinction becomes especially noticeable aboard First Order vessels. Consider the command structure surrounding General Armitage Hux. Hux represented institutional authority. He commanded armies, supervised Starkiller Base, and oversaw military operations according to established procedures. Kylo Ren occupied a different category entirely. His authority came not from rank, but from proximity to Snoke and mastery of the dark side. The Knights existed even farther outside conventional structures. They answered to Kylo and little else. In practice, they functioned almost like an independent force, operating within the larger First Order framework. Their unusual status likely created tension. The films provide glimpses of the hostility between Hux and Kylo. Hux viewed Kylo as unpredictable. Kylo viewed Hux as weak. The Knights almost certainly amplified this divide. Imagine being a First Order officer tasked with maintaining discipline aboard a Star Destroyer while 6 masked warriors carrying axes and scavenged weapons moved freely through restricted areas. They obeyed different rules. They served different priorities. Their very presence undermined the orderly military culture leaders like Hux preferred. Yet Snoke tolerated all of it. That fact alone suggests the Knights served a valuable purpose. They represented an extension of Kylo's influence. As long as Kylo remained loyal, the Knights strengthened Snoke's position. Their existence helped anchor Kylo within the dark side. They reinforced the identity he had built after abandoning Ben Solo. Every mission they completed together deepened the separation between Kylo's present and his past. In that sense, the Knights were not merely followers. They were part of the architecture holding Kylo Ren together. There is another layer to this relationship that becomes clearer in retrospect. Snoke consistently encouraged Kylo to destroy emotional attachments. He ordered the capture of Rey. He pushed Kylo toward confrontation with Han Solo. He praised ruthlessness and condemned hesitation. The Knights of Ren embodied those values. Unlike Leia, Organa, or Han Solo, they expected nothing from Ben beyond strength. Unlike Luke Skywalker, they never challenged his worldview through compassion or forgiveness. They reinforced exactly the version of himself that Snoke wanted to cultivate. Still, questions remain. How much did the Knights actually know about Snoke's larger plans? Did they understand the scale of the First Order's ambitions? Were they aware of Exegol and the Sith Eternal? Canon provides no clear answers. Their behavior suggests limited involvement in the deeper layers of Sith strategy. They appear more like trusted enforcers than senior conspirators. While figures such as Allegiant General Pride eventually knew of Exegol's existence, there is no evidence the Knights possessed similar knowledge during this period. That ignorance would have been fitting. Throughout their history, the Knights focused on immediate expressions of power rather than long-term ideology. They fought, they hunted, they enforced Kylo's will. Grand political visions belonged to others. The New Republic dreamed of lasting peace. The First Order dreamed of restored Imperial dominance. The Sith Eternal dreamed of eternal Sith rule. The Knights dreamed of nothing so elaborate. They followed strength wherever it led them. That simplicity became both their strength and their limitation. By 34 ABY, events were accelerating rapidly. Resistance agents were searching for the missing map to Luke Skywalker. Poe Dameron carried part of the map hidden inside the astromech BB-8. Rey scavenged wreckage beneath the deserts of Jakku, unaware of her true heritage. Finn prepared to abandon the stormtrooper ranks. Across the galaxy, countless lives moved toward collision. The Knights of Ren remained largely unseen during these events, but they stood close to the center of the coming storm, and beyond even Snoke's awareness. Another force was already waiting in the darkness of the unknown regions, the hidden Emperor whose plans would eventually draw Kylo Ren, the Knights, and the entire galaxy toward the forbidden world of Exegol. How much did the Knights of Ren actually understand about the ancient Sith secrets that eventually led Kylo Ren to Exegol? By the final year of the war between the Resistance and the First Order, the galaxy stood on the edge of revelations hidden for generations. Sith cultists moved in secret. Ancient pathways were reopening. Long-forgotten worlds were emerging from myth. Yet the Knights of Ren occupied a curious position within these events. They stood close to the center of the storm without necessarily understanding everything swirling around them. They followed Kylo Ren toward answers that even he did not fully comprehend. The turning point arrived shortly after the death of Supreme Leader Snoke in 34 ABY. During the events aboard the Supremacy, Kylo Ren killed his master and seized control of the First Order. It was a dramatic break from the relationship that had shaped much of his adult life. For years, Snoke had guided, manipulated, and disciplined him. Now Snoke's bisected body lay dead in the throne room while First Order officers struggled to adapt to a new reality. Kylo Ren had become Supreme Leader, yet power did not bring him peace. The conflict inside him remained unresolved, despite his efforts to destroy the past. The past continued returning. Rey challenged his assumptions. Memories of Han Solo lingered. Leia Organa remained alive. The bond between Rey and Kylo, later revealed as a Force dyad, deepened in ways neither fully understood. By the opening of The Rise of Skywalker in 35 ABY, Kylo had achieved everything he once believed he wanted. He commanded the most powerful military force in the known galaxy, yet he continued searching. That search led him to Mustafar. The world carried enormous significance within Star Wars history. It was on Mustafar in 19 BBY that Anakin Skywalker fought Obi-Wan Kenobi beside rivers of lava and suffered the injuries that transformed him into Darth Vader. Decades later, Darth Vader constructed a fortress there using ancient Sith architecture and dark side energy woven into the planet itself. By 35 ABY, the castle still stood as a monument to pain, obsession, and unfinished ambition. Kylo's arrival on Mustafar was brief but important. Canon establishes that he fought his way through defenders guarding a Sith wayfinder hidden within Vader's stronghold. The sequence appears at the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker. Red light flickers across black volcanic rock. Blades clash in darkness. Kylo moves through resistance with ruthless efficiency. When the battle ends, he secures the artifact he came to retrieve. The object itself appears unremarkable at first glance, yet it contains knowledge capable of altering the fate of the galaxy. The Sith Wayfinder was one of the few devices capable of navigating the dangerous routes leading to Exegol. Hidden deep within the unknown regions, Exegol remained inaccessible through ordinary hyperspace travel. Violent gravitational anomalies and hazardous space phenomena surrounded it. Without specialized guidance, reaching the world was nearly impossible. Darth Sidious had relied upon such devices long before his apparent death at Endor. Now Kylo possessed one. The path to the greatest secret of the Sith had opened before him. The journey that followed marked a profound shift in the story of the Knights of Ren. For decades, they had existed on the margins of galactic history. Their concerns revolved around survival, violence, loyalty, and power. Suddenly, they found themselves connected to the deepest layers of Sith legacy. Ancient cults, hidden fleets, dark side experiments stretching back to the reign of the Empire. The scale of events had expanded far beyond anything envisioned by the original Ren. Whether the Knights fully grasped that transformation remains unclear. When Kylo finally arrived on Exegol, the revelations were staggering. Endless storm clouds churned above a desolate world. Colossal statues loomed in darkness. Thousands of Sith eternal cultists filled enormous chambers carved into ancient stone. Most shocking of all was the survival of Darth Sidious himself. Though physically broken and sustained through unnatural means, the former Emperor remained alive. The architect of the Clone Wars, the Galactic Empire, and the destruction of the Jedi Order had endured beyond death. For Kylo Ren, the encounter shattered assumptions that had guided him for years. Snoke had seemed powerful. Palpatine revealed an entirely different scale of power and planning. The First Order itself suddenly appeared as only one piece of a much larger design. Hidden beneath Exegol waited the Final Order, a fleet of Ziston-class star destroyers equipped with planet-killing weapons derived from Death Star technology. Thousands of crews, officers, technicians, and cultists had been preparing for this moment in secret. The hidden empire beneath the known galaxy was larger than anyone had imagined. Yet an important question lingers. Where were the Knights of Ren during these revelations? Canon does not show them standing beside Kylo during his first audience with Palpatine. The conversation unfolds primarily between master strategist and potential heir. This absence may be significant. Palpatine cared about Kylo. He cared about Rey. He cared about the Skywalker bloodline and the Force dyad. The Knights themselves were secondary, useful tools perhaps, loyal followers certainly, but not central players in the Sith Lord's vision. Even so, the consequences of the meeting would shape their fate. Palpatine tasked Kylo with finding and eliminating Rey. The Order launched a chain of events spanning Pasaana, Kijimi, Kef Bir, and ultimately Exegol itself. Across these worlds, the search for Sith knowledge accelerated. Ancient daggers, hidden wayfinders, and lost Imperial secrets resurfaced. The Knights moved through this unfolding crisis as extensions of Kylo's will. Their weapons remained the same, their loyalty remained unchanged. Yet the stage upon which they acted had become the largest in their history. There is a certain irony in this moment. The original Ren taught that the shadow existed everywhere and that strength alone mattered. Now his former followers found themselves entangled in the ambitions of Darth Sidious, perhaps the most calculating figure in galactic history. The raw simplicity of the Knights collided with schemes thousands of years in the making. They had begun as wanderers around a fire beneath forgotten stars. Now they stood on the threshold of the Sith's greatest secret. As hyperspace routes converged and fleets prepared for war, another transformation was quietly underway. Kylo Ren had traveled to Exegol, seeking power. Instead, he found a future that threatened to make him subordinate. Once again, the promise of becoming heir to Palpatine came with chains of its own. And before long, events on Kef Bir and the final intervention of Leia Organa would force him to confront a choice that neither Ren nor Snoke had ever truly prepared him to make. When Kylo Ren ceased being Kylo Ren, what did the Knights of Ren see standing before them? This question lies at the heart of their final appearance in Star Wars canon. For years, they had followed a leader defined by anger, ambition, and devotion to the dark side. They had accepted him after he killed the original Ren. They had remained loyal through the rise of the First Order, the death of Snoke, and the revelation of Darth Sidious. Then, in the final days of the war, everything changed. The man they served began moving back toward the identity he had spent years trying to destroy. The turning point came on the shattered remains of the second Death Star above the ocean moon of Kef Bir. The location itself carried immense symbolic weight. Decades earlier, during the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY, the station had been the site of Darth Vader's redemption and Palpatine's apparent death. Now another Skywalker descendant arrived there carrying his own burdens. Rey and Kylo Ren clashed amid crashing waves and broken Imperial wreckage. Their duel unfolded atop the ruins of an empire that had once shaped the galaxy. The battle was fierce, but the decisive moment did not come from superior swordsmanship. It came from Leia Organa. Across the stars, Leia reached out through the Force and called to her son. The effort demanded everything she had left. As she did so, Kylo hesitated. For a brief instant, the fury driving him faltered. Rey sensed the opening and struck. Her lightsaber pierced him. The confrontation ended not with triumph, but with realization. What followed remains one of the most important moments in the sequel trilogy. Instead of killing him, Rey healed the wound using the Force. Then she told him that she'd wanted to take Ben Solo's hand, not Kylo Ren's. Afterward, she departed, leaving him alone among the wreckage. Nearby, Leia Organa died after her final act of reaching her son. The galaxy lost one of its greatest leaders. Ben Solo lost his mother, and in the silence that followed, the identity of Kylo Ren began to collapse. The next scene deliberately echoes an earlier moment from The Force Awakens. On Kef Bir, Ben encounters a memory of Han Solo. Canon presents this not as a Force ghost, but as a manifestation of memory and conscience. Years earlier on Starkiller Base, Kylo had murdered his father in an attempt to sever his emotional ties forever. Now the conversation returns. Han speaks gently. Ben listens. The weight of years presses down upon him. Finally, he throws away his lightsaber into the waters below. That gesture carries extraordinary significance. The crossguard lightsaber had accompanied him through nearly every stage of his transformation. It symbolized Kylo Ren's identity just as strongly as Darth Vader's armor symbolized Anakin's fall. When Ben casts it aside, he rejects more than a weapon. He rejects the path he had followed since 28 ABY. He rejects the teachings of Snoke. He rejects the legacy of the original Ren. Most importantly, he chooses to stop running from the person he once was. Yet the galaxy does not pause simply because one man has changed. While Ben begins his return, Palpatine continues preparing the final order on Exegol. The Resistance races toward a desperate confrontation, and the Knights of Ren remain loyal to the darkness. This loyalty reveals something fundamental about their nature. They had never truly followed Ben Solo. They had followed Kylo Ren. The distinction suddenly matters. When Ben abandoned the identity they served, he effectively abandoned his place within the Order. Their response came swiftly. Following Ben's redemption, the Knights aligned themselves with Palpatine's side of the conflict. Canon does not show an extended debate or internal struggle. There is no evidence of hesitation. The transition appears almost immediate. This reaction fits everything previously established about them. They respected strength. They followed power. Palpatine represented the greatest concentration of dark side authority in the galaxy. Ben Solo represented uncertainty, compassion, and change. The Knights chose accordingly. This decision also answers a question lingering since the death of the original Ren. Were the Knights loyal to individuals or to ideas? Their actions suggest the latter. They followed the original Ren because he embodied the shadow. They followed Kylo Ren because he defeated Ren and embraced darkness even more completely. Once Ben turned away from that path, their loyalty vanished. In a sense, they remained more faithful to their philosophy than to any particular leader. The irony is that the same principle which elevated Kylo eventually isolated him. By the time Ben reached Exegol, he arrived not as supreme leader of the First Order, but as a solitary figure. He possessed no fleet. No army accompanied him. He traveled using a TIE fighter, and the second Sith Wayfinder recovered from the wreckage of the Death Star. The contrast with his earlier status could not have been sharper. Once he had commanded Star Destroyers and legions of stormtroopers. Now he stood alone against forces vastly larger than himself. Yet for the first time in years, he moved with clarity. The atmosphere awaiting him on Exegol felt almost dreamlike. Lightning flashed across endless storm clouds. Towering structures emerged from darkness. The chants of Sith eternal cultists echoed through colossal chambers. Rey had already arrived and confronted Palpatine. Resistance fleets were converging above the planet. Every storyline stretching back through the sequel trilogy was approaching its conclusion. Somewhere within this chaos waited the Knights of Ren, preparing to face the man they once followed. There is something quietly tragic about that final meeting. The Knights had traveled beside Ben longer than almost anyone else in his adult life. Longer than Rey, longer than most First Order officers, longer even than many of the relationships he formed under Snoke. They had witnessed his rise from a confused former Jedi to supreme leader. Yet when the decisive moment arrived, they could not recognize the transformation taking place within him. To them, Ben Solo appeared not as a redeemed man, but as a traitor to everything they believed. As Ben walked deeper into the ancient Sith citadel, the air seemed heavy with the weight of forgotten centuries. The glow of distant machinery reflected across black stone. Thunder rolled through cavernous halls. Ahead stood 6 masked warriors carrying blades, clubs, axes, and rifles worn by years of conflict. Once they would have knelt before him. Now they blocked his path. And in the shadows of Exegol, beneath the gaze of the last Sith Emperor, the final chapter of the Knights of Ren was about to begin. Were the Knights of Ren truly destroyed on Exegol, or was the idea of Ren always larger than the individuals who carried the name? The final battle of the Knights occupies only a few minutes of screen time in The Rise of Skywalker, yet those moments serve as the culmination of a story stretching back years before the sequel trilogy began. The masked warriors who once gathered around a fire beneath distant stars had followed 2 different leaders, survived the rise of the First Order, and witnessed the return of Darth Sidious. Now they stood at the end of their journey. Opposite them stood the man they had once called Master, not Kylo Ren, Ben Solo. The confrontation begins with an important disadvantage. Ben arrives on Exegol without a lightsaber. After casting away his crossguard weapon on Kef Bir, he possesses only his skills, his instincts, and his connection to the Force. The Knights, by contrast, are fully armed. Their weapons represent years of battle experience. Aplek's heavy axe, Trudgen's brutal cleaver, Vikrul's scythe-like weapon, Kuruk's rifle, Cardo's blaster systems, and Ushar's war club surround him from every direction. The imbalance appears overwhelming. For a moment, the outcome seems obvious. Yet appearances often deceive in Star Wars. Throughout the saga, the Force has repeatedly shifted battles that appeared impossible. Luke Skywalker destroyed the first Death Star during the Battle of Yavin in 0 BBY through trust in the Force. Darth Vader redeemed himself aboard the second Death Star in 4 ABY through an act no one expected. Now another extraordinary moment unfolds. Across the distance separating them, Rey and Ben remain connected through the Force dyad first revealed during the sequel trilogy. That bond allows something unprecedented to occur. As Ben faces the Knights, Rey reaches through the connection and passes Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber to him. The gesture lasts only seconds, but its symbolism is immense. This is the same weapon carried by Anakin during the Clone Wars, the same weapon inherited by Luke Skywalker, the same weapon that passed through decades of galactic history before reaching Rey. Now it arrives in Ben Solo's hands at the exact moment he needs it most. The legacy of the Skywalkers returns to one of its own. The battle changes instantly. Blue light erupts within the darkness of Exegol. For years, the Knights had fought beside Kylo Ren and his unstable red blade. Now they face Ben Solo carrying the traditional weapon of the Jedi. The contrast is striking. One by one, the Knights attack. One by one, they fall. Ben moves with confidence and clarity absent from many of his earlier duels. The rage that once defined him has vanished. What remains is skill, determination, and purpose. Canon leaves little ambiguity about the outcome. All 6 Knights are defeated within the Sith Citadel. None survive to appear again in subsequent stories. Their weapons scatter across the floor. Their long journey comes to an abrupt end. For viewers hoping to learn more about individual members, the scene may feel surprisingly brief. Yet from a thematic perspective, the confrontation serves a clear function. The Knights represent the life Ben is leaving behind. To reach Rey and confront Palpatine, he must pass through the final remnants of his former identity. There is an irony hidden within their defeat. The original Ren taught that strength determined legitimacy. By that standard, Ben's victory represents the ultimate confirmation of the philosophy. He defeats 6 experienced warriors alone. He overcomes the order that once defined him. He demonstrates greater power than any knight who came before him. Yet at the same time, his victory completely rejects the values Ren preached. Ben fights not for domination or personal ambition, but to save another person. Strength remains. Purpose changes. Above Exegol, meanwhile, the larger battle reaches its climax. Resistance forces led by figures such as Poe Dameron, Finn, and Lando Calrissian engage the Final Order fleet. Civilian ships arrive from across the galaxy in answer to Lando's call for aid. Ziston-class star destroyers attempt to deploy from Exegol's atmosphere. Lightning flashes across storm-filled skies. The fate of countless worlds hangs in the balance. Compared to the scale of this conflict, the fall of 6 masked warriors may seem small. Yet for Ben Solo, it is the most personal battle of all. The destruction of the Knights also marks the end of a unique branch of dark side tradition. Throughout canon, audiences encounter many Force organizations. The Jedi Order serves the light side. The Sith pursue power through darkness. Groups such as the Night Sisters of Dathomir follow their own mystical practices. The Guardians of the Wills maintain spiritual traditions connected to the Force. The Knights of Ren occupy a category all their own. Their beliefs never evolved into a vast religion. Their influence never spread across the galaxy. Yet they represent a rare example of dark side users operating outside the Sith framework. That distinction becomes even clearer when compared with Legends material. In the older non-canon expanded universe, numerous dark side cults, warlords, and Force traditions existed beyond the Sith. Since the 2014 canon reset, Lucasfilm has generally focused more heavily on the Jedi and Sith. The Knights of Ren therefore stand out as one of the few major canon attempts to explore an alternative dark side path. Their philosophy remained crude and often self-destructive, but it was undeniably distinct. They remind us that the Force has always inspired more than 2 traditions. After the battle, Ben continues deeper into the Citadel. The Knights are gone. Their role in galactic history has ended. Ahead waits Rey. Ahead waits Palpatine. Ahead waits the final confrontation that will determine the fate of the Skywalker saga itself. The men and women who once followed Ren no longer stand between him and that destiny. Their story concludes not with speeches or ceremonies, but with silence. And yet the final mystery remains. Did the Knights of Ren truly vanish forever on Exegol? The individuals certainly did. Canon has never suggested otherwise, but the idea behind them is harder to bury. Somewhere in the vastness of the galaxy, forgotten worlds still exist beyond the attention of governments. Ancient relics remain hidden beneath desert sands and jungle ruins. Force traditions continue to survive outside the institutions most people know. The conditions that produce the Knights have not disappeared. Only the Knights themselves have. Long after the storm above Exegol fades and the wreckage cools beneath distant stars, the memory of the Order lingers like the last glow of a dying fire. A group of wanderers gathered around a philosophy called the Shadow, a leader known only as Ren, a fallen Jedi who became their master and ultimately their destroyer. Their masks lie abandoned in darkness now. Their weapons are still. But the wind continues moving through the forgotten places of the galaxy, just as it did on the night when their story first began beside the flames. The story of the Knights of Ren reveals something quietly important about the Star Wars galaxy. For much of the saga, history appears to revolve around grand institutions. The Jedi preserve knowledge across millennia. The Sith build hidden plans that survive generations. Republics rise, empires fall. Fleets cross the stars. Yet the Knights existed outside those structures. They were not guardians of ancient wisdom. They were not architects of galactic destiny. They were people who believed that freedom could be found by surrendering to impulse, by rejecting restraint, by embracing the shadow wherever it appeared. And in the end, their fate suggests that power without purpose burns brightly for a time, but struggles to endure. If you look closely, the original Ren and Darth Sidious stand at opposite ends of the same dark road. Ren wanted little beyond strength in the present moment. Palpatine wanted control over the future itself. One wandered the frontier, the other sought dominion over an entire galaxy. Yet both ultimately treated other beings as instruments rather than people. Both measured worth through power. Both believed the darkness could be mastered or embraced without cost. The Star Wars saga returns again and again to this lesson. Darkness often offers certainty. It promises simple answers to complicated pain. But certainty is not the same thing as wisdom. That is why Ben Solo remains the true center of the Knight's story. At first glance, the narrative seems to belong to a mysterious order of masked warriors. Yet beneath the armor, weapons, and forgotten philosophies lies a familiar struggle. Ben spends years searching for an identity strong enough to silence doubt. He looks to Snoke, he looks to Vader's legacy, he looks to the Knights of Ren. Each offers a version of power detached from vulnerability. Each promises escape from fear. Yet none can give him what he actually lacks. The answer arrives only when he stops running from his past and accepts responsibility for it. There is a reason the Knights cannot follow him after that choice. Their philosophy leaves no room for redemption. The Jedi believe people can return from darkness. Luke Skywalker believed it about Darth Vader. Rey believed it about Ben Solo. Leia Organa never stopped believing it about her son. The Knights of Ren believed only in strength. Once Ben chose compassion over domination, he stepped beyond the limits of their worldview. To them, that looked like weakness. To the saga itself, it becomes an act of courage. The distinction explains why the Knights fade into history, while Ben's final choice echoes through generations. You can also see in their story a reminder that the Force is larger than any single tradition. The Jedi do not own it. The Sith do not own it. Across canon, countless cultures touch the Force in different ways. Some seek harmony, some seek power, some barely understand what they have found. The Knights of Ren were one such path, a rough and fragmented philosophy born far from temples and academies. Their existence makes the galaxy feel older and wider. Even their failure adds texture to the larger story, showing how many different answers beings have sought when confronting the mystery of the Force. And so, as the saga settles into silence once more, you find yourself back where the journey began. The great battles are over. The final order has fallen. The names of emperors, generals, and Jedi masters drift into history. Somewhere beyond the busy hyperspace lanes, beyond the capitals and monuments, an abandoned outpost still stands beneath a dark sky. The fire is burned down to embers, the masks are gone, the voices have faded. Only the wind remains, moving softly through the ruins and carrying the last traces of a forgotten name into the night.